Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Hi! Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. So, thanks for watching the video, thanks for listening to the podcast. Today we're going to be running through key asbestos information that every property manager should know. There's going to be some real good takeaway points from this today. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching. For those that are just listening on the podcast, we'll try and describe everything that's on the screen. But like I say, we are videoing it as well, and the video is going to go out. So if there's anything that we describe and you think, do you know what, I want to have a look at that, by all means, have a look at the video as well.
Yeah, just want to say, if you are on Facebook, come and join us at the Asbestos Knowledge Empire community. You just select to be a member. And you've got access to myself and Ian. Ask any question, please log on. We answer all questions, so please feel free to ask us anything.
Yeah, literally anything. You've got an issue going on site, you've got a question about how to do something asbestos-wise, whatever it is. Get involved, get on there, and we can start a bit of communication and hopefully help you out. So I'm going to run through the overview of training. So today we're going to run through asbestos products and their uses, survey types and what to expect, the survey process and any annual requirements, surveyor competence and how to check, contractor competence and how to check, and also report expectations, survey report expectations. So a little bit about myself before we start. My name is Ian Stone. I'm a director of Acorn Analytical Services. I've been in the asbestos industry for about 18 years. Now, and I've done pretty much every job in the asbestos industry. Started as a trainee, worked basically doing asbestos surveys, asbestos analytical works, using air monitoring out on site. I've worked in the asbestos laboratory, analysing samples. I've also worked at the Asbestos Trade Association. I managed that for 3 years, ATAC. And I've also worked on the removal contractor side as well. So, like I say, pretty much every job in the industry.
Hi, my name's Neil Munro. Very similar background to Ian. We've kind of mirrored the career path each, apart from the ATAC side of it. Only slight difference is I've tended to do a bit more training, so I've trained lots of individuals and businesses about the associated risk from asbestos. So hopefully, if you guys have got any questions, we should have the answers. If we haven't got the answers, we know where to look for those answers. So yeah, feel free to ask us anything.
Excellent stuff. So along with that, like Neil was saying, we are also asbestos geeks. Yeah, massive asbestos geeks, and we've written a book, and Neil's grabbed a copy there. It's Asbestos, the Dark Arts. It's filled with all information for duty holders and property managers of how to manage asbestos. We've kind of tried to simplify a lot of the things out there that overcomplicate and make asbestos management hard, because it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah, to get your copy, if you go to www.asbestosthedarkarts.com, you'll be able to purchase your own copy there. If you don't like reading books, we have got an audio version which is just released last week. So yeah, if you like to listen to audio books, you can get that via our website, or it's available on Audible or Amazon.
So straight in then, what is asbestos? So on the screen we've got a couple of photos of one of our microscopes and a box of rocks, and then below it we've got a big rock, and basically that's where asbestos comes from. It's mined out of the ground, and it's formed in the veins of various rocks, and for those that are watching, you can see the sort of the fibres in it, and that's it in its raw state. It's a silicate mineral, like I say, it's fibrous in structure. That's essentially what asbestos is. And there's 6 types of asbestos.
Yeah. So when we talk about asbestos, lots of people recognise the colours, or often they recognise the colours. So the blue, brown and the whites, lots of people have heard of that. So they were the big three asbestos types that were commercially used in this country. So we've got chrysolite, which is a real powerful blue fibre colour. For those watching the video, you can actually see the real powerful blue within that material. You've got amosite, which is referred to as brown asbestos. It's got a slight brown colour to it. It's not as powerful as the chrysolite blue asbestos.
More of a tinge, isn't it?
More of a tinge, yeah. Now these are real sort of like needle-like fibres, so like straight fibres. And then we've got chrysotile, which is white asbestos, or referred to as white asbestos. Now that's got like a silky, real sort of clean white colour to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
But it's curly in structure, so it's curly and wavy, so it's slightly different structure to the other two asbestos fibre types. So they're the big three that were used. Chrysotile really was the gigantic one that was used in this country. It sort of made up about 92% of asbestos, or asbestos put into products within this country. So these were the big three, but this was a real giant. So there are three other types which were less used, and they're amphipholite asbestos, actinolite asbestos, and
tremolite
asbestos. Thanks, Ian. So they were the three lesser types that were used. Now, they were commercially in very, very small quantities used into products, but they were also sometimes identified as contaminants in the other three that were used. So when we are analysing asbestos samples in our laboratory, we're looking for the big three, but we're also looking for the lesser three as well. Yeah.
So how many products have contained asbestos? There's no definitive list. There's not a catalogue where all the asbestos items have all been put together in. But generally the rule of thumb is 5,000 products. There's a hell of a lot of asbestos products that have been used over the years and what asbestos has been added to. We're going to run through some, but kind of just to give you a bit of an inclination of how and why. I mean, it was sold and marketed as the magic mineral. It was great at what it did for insulation and things like that, but also it was cheap. And those kind of are the main reasons of why it was used. If a product could be made better or cheaper by adding asbestos, then it generally was. So we've got some factory built and manufactured items. So when we talk about asbestos, we don't always mean just what the building is made up of. We also mean what manufactured items has asbestos been added to. So we've got a list here. There's hair dryers, toasters, toys, fridges, freezers, all sorts of different products and things that asbestos has been added to that are within buildings. So it's not just the buildings themselves, it's actually the things within the buildings.
Yeah, if I just add to that, Ian, lots of tradespeople, especially when they're going to do a job within a building, what they're thinking about is, are they going to disturb asbestos whilst working on the structure of the building? Which, okay, that's good, but what sometimes they do forget about is the items that they may work on within the building which may contain asbestos. So, particularly gas heaters, electrical units, boilers, they all contain asbestos. But some of the rare ones, like filing cabinets and stuff like that, which, if you're a removal person, you may be removing the filing cabinet and that could have asbestos in it. So it's not just the structure of the building you need to be aware of, it's the items within that as well.
So on screen now we've got a whole massive list of materials found to contain asbestos. Like I say, it's been used in pretty much anything and everything over the years. So
it's our favourites there, isn't it?
Yeah. Cords, curtains, wicks, baby powder it was even in at one point. Asbestos yarn, loft insulation. It's kind of like I say, if you can think about the product, at one time or another, probably asbestos was used in it.
Yeah, definitely. I think when people, like common people, think about asbestos, they think of corrugated cement roofs, don't they?
Yeah, that's the number one.
They think of maybe ceiling tiles. They think of pipe insulation. which are very, very common.
Floor tiles,
yeah. But then, if you look at these lists, and we've got asbestos tapes, we've got hoods, we've got cords, we've got what else we've got? So we've got adhesives, we've got mastics, we've got putties. These are real sort of unusual ones. Hair dryers, we've got cork boards,
glass blower mitts here. So they're like the ones that we're going to show you.
Yeah. So there's some real unusual uses of asbestos.
So there's been 3 slides, a whole heap of stuff just listed out. Some very random ones.
Yeah, T-bar ceiling tile. I don't even know what that is.
Popcorn poppers.
Yeah.
Laboratory hoods. Again, if you can think of it, it's probably been used in at some point or another. So we're going to run through some unusual asbestos examples, just to kind of highlight the weird and wonderful things that it's been used in over the years.
So here, the first example, if you can picture this, it looks like an oven glove or maybe a soldering mitt.
Yeah, welder's mitt, something like that.
Yeah. So this is a 100% chrysotile woven glove, okay, which has been made and created into a glove structure. Now, this is probably really fireproof, and it probably would really protect the holder of the glove. And believe it or not, this was brand new, bought last year, I think, was it?
Yeah, last year.
We actually bought this off eBay, and it was made in China. So China's still producing asbestos-containing materials, and they're selling them into the UK illegally. So just something to be aware of if you are on eBay purchasing random items from China, they could still contain asbestos.
And it's like, just going back to the point Neil mentioned earlier about the filing cabinets. We've known cases where businesses have moved offices from an older office that might have had asbestos in, brought all their gear along to a brand new building with no asbestos in, but they bought their old filing cabinet. So that's one way asbestos can be brought into a building. But this is another one as well. If I was a welder and I needed some new mitts, I'd go online. eBay's a great place to have a look, scroll through. I'm a layperson, I don't even think about asbestos, I just want my pair of mitts. And this is how easy it is to go on there, and then you end up having asbestos on your sites.
Yeah. So 100% white cross-tile asbestos woven into a glove. Yeah. You can't get more
asbestos product than that.
Yeah.
So on screen we've got a photo of a guy doing his shoes up. Again, quite a very random one.
We were wearing asbestos.
Yeah, we were wearing it. It's crazy. There was a product, Dr. Hodges asbestos insoles. They were really fibrous. They looked really itchy and horrible to wear.
If you just go back to that last slide, Ian, like that all looks really smooth.
Yes.
But these weren't. They were like really horrible. If you could,
raggedy old.
Yeah, if you could imagine the most horrible itchiest socks, like woolen socks.
Woolen horrible socks.
Times 10. That they look so horribly itchy.
But again, this shows you the marketing machine that was behind asbestos and why it was used so much. On the packaging for the insoles, it said, "Do you suffer from corns, bunions, inflamed or perspiring feet? Then try Dr. Hodges asbestos insoles." Now, I'm pretty confident that they would have done nothing for your bunions and your inflamed and your perspiring feet.
Nothing positive, anyway.
Nothing positive, no. But this is kind of the marketing machine that was behind it, really pushing it and saying it was the best thing ever. Again, we've got another photo of it's dish towels.
Yeah, so we're not just working with asbestos in buildings, we had asbestos in our home. We were doing the washing up, we were drying our dishes up with asbestos, unbelievably. And it was often marketed as containing asbestos. That was a real good thing. That was a marketing ploy. That they were saying that you need these dish towels because they've got asbestos in them. Yeah. We were at home doing the washing up, exposing our families to asbestos.
Yeah. Now we've got a photo of a lady holding a handful of snow and blowing it. So for those that are on the podcast, you might be thinking, well, why the hell is there a photo of somebody blowing snow? Well, there was a company that produced, it was fireproof fake snow. And again, it was sold as the thing that you needed as a family to finish your Christmas tree. What else do you need? You've got the tree set up, you've got the baubles on there, the tinsel's on there, the fairy lights are on. Do you know what you need to really finish it off and give it that Christmassy feel? You need some fake snow. And the fake snow one, again, it was 100% white asbestos in a box. Not sealed, nothing. Wasn't even woven together, it was just as loose as it could be, that you sprinkled all over the tree to really finish off that and give it that magic look.
Yeah, literally just raw fibre.
Yeah.
That raw state product in a box. And yeah, if you read the instructions, this is taken from the box. So for best effect, sprinkle on a tree after it's been completely dressed, easily removed from rugs and carpets with a vacuum cleaner, can be used over and over again. Now, the worst thing that you can do with asbestos is vacuum it up with a normal vacuum cleaner, because what it does, it breaks down the fibres even more, and because of the exhaust on the vacuum, it blows those minute fibres into the air, and that's the biggest risk when we talk about asbestos, is exposure to the fibres, so the person breathing in those asbestos fibres, and that can then lead on to asbestos related diseases. So yeah, that is a real big no-no. And to the fact that you can use it over and over again, so each year you can get the box out and expose your family.
Yeah, crazy.
Unbelievable. There's a couple of films that they used that snow in as well.
Yes.
Weren't
Bing Crosby's White Christmas and The Wizard of Oz.
That's it. So the snow scenes in those films, if you watch them back, was asbestos snow. So unbelievable. Those actors, film crews, whoever was on set those days, they would have had massive exposures to asbestos, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And then another kind of one down the film line. Steve McQueen died of mesothelioma. His exposure wasn't from film sets, although they think it was attributed to, he did a lot of racing and he would wear face shields and stuff like that on his motorbikes under the helmet, so he would have got exposure from that. But they believe his main exposure was from removing pipe insulation from a ship when he used to be a sailor.
Which is most likely, really.
Yeah, and he would have got massive exposures.
Yeah, because boats and maritime vessels, they heavily used asbestos, didn't they?
Did indeed. So now up on screen, we've got some cigarettes. Again, a random one for the guys listening. Yeah, there's cigarette butts and also a petri dish of chrysidolite blue asbestos. Now, in the 50s, a company called Kent Cigarettes, they created what they coined the famous micronite filter. They said it was the greatest health protection in history. And the reason they were selling it as this is that apparently their filters that have asbestos in remove tar and nicotine, which again is ludicrous. I'm pretty confident that anybody smoking Kent cigarettes with these filters on would still be getting the same amount of tar and nicotine as a normal cigarette, but it's actually a hell of a lot worse because they would have been breathing in God knows how many thousands of fibres of blue asbestos every time they had a cigarette.
Yeah, unbelievable that is. Okay, so now we're going to talk about asbestos survey types. So, you may or may not be aware of the previous names for asbestos surveys. So prior to this asbestos guidance, which came out in 2010, so HSG 264 Asbestos Survey Guide, so that's the guidance that we currently use. The previous guidance used to call them Type 1, Type 2 and Type 3s. And me saying that to you now, it's undescriptive. No one really knew what, do I need a Type 1 or Type 3 or Type 1, what I don't understand the
What's
meaning
best?
of those.
Is a number 1 the best or is a number 3 the best?
Yeah, exactly. So what the HC did when they put this guidance together was renamed the survey types. So we now refer to them as management surveys, refurbishment surveys and demolition surveys. And as you can see, the names are very descriptive to their likely end result. So if you're looking to manage asbestos, you would have a management survey. If you're looking to do some refurbishment works, you'd have a refurbishment survey. And if you're looking to demolish a building, you'd have a demolition survey. Now, the guidance, although it was good and was well written, there was a slight confusion in it, and the guidance sort of refers to refurbishment and demolition surveys as being the same survey, but they're really not. They are completely different surveys, and we'll explain the difference. And there's some terminology, and some companies refer to these surveys as R&D surveys. So you may be familiar with that.
Yeah, it's kind of that's thrown as a blanket, all-encompassing R&D. But in reality, if you're just doing a refurb, there's no demolition involved as such. So we'll explain why they are differences. So what is a management survey? So it's used to provide general information from the day-to-day use of the premises. It's to find asbestos during normal occupancy of a building. The surveyors would go and access everywhere that a maintenance person would go. So what I mean by that is if there's a suspended ceiling, the surveyors would take tiles out, look in the ceiling void. If there were riser panels and the riser panels can be removed, again, those riser panels will be taken off and checked. Just generally kind of anywhere that a maintenance person would go in the day-to-day use and occupation of the building.
Yeah, sort of below carpet tiles, if we can lift those up, we'd expect under there, wouldn't we? But if it was a fixed carpet, we wouldn't necessarily do that. And the same with floor coverings and stuff like that, isn't it, really? Definitely. Stopcocks and stuff like that underneath kitchen cupboards, we'd open those up.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't, like Ian said, we wouldn't cause damage, would we?
No. It is a sampling survey, so the surveyors inspect the building for different materials that may or may not contain asbestos, and then sample accordingly to bring back to the lab for analysis. And like Neil just said, it's not destructive in the nature of what it is. For those listening, we've got a photo on the screen of what you'll see. Generally when we do surveys, we just wear normal corporate clothing and then whatever PPE and RPE is needed. So if there's a site, I don't know, it's got vehicle movements, we'd wear high vis. If there's a risk of something falling on our heads, we'd wear hard hats, that kind of stuff. We generally just take ladders, our sampling kit and our respirator, and we only put the respirator on at the point of sampling when we need to. So what kind of damage will you see? So when I say damage, it's very minimal and limited. We take samples. So there's a photo of a texture coating like an Artex coating to a ceiling, a stippled finish. The photo on the left just shows the ceiling as it is. The photo on the right just shows the same ceiling but just with a little white patch over it. Now what that white patch is, the surveyor will have scraped a small section of that texture coating into a bag and then resealed over the area with white paint to stop anything else from flaking and just make it safe after they've taken the sample.
So what's a refurbishment survey then? So we've now explained management survey. We're now going to sort of go up the intrusion level regarding the survey. So these surveys are used to identify asbestos which may be hidden within the actual structure of the building. So if you're planning to do refurbishment works, and for instance if you're taking down a wall, we'd need to check to see if there's anything contained within the actual wall cavity. So a refurbishment survey would intrusively inspect those areas to identify if there's anything hidden there. It's should be used for prior to any type of refurbishment, or that may include some sort of intrusive maintenance works. So that may be upgrading machinery or heating. You may need an intrusive survey for those types of works. It does disturb the fabric of the building, and it's fully intrusive and destructive in line with the scope of works. Okay, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. So, important key points. So, refurbishment surveys, the asbestos surveyor will need a full scope of work. So, the surveyor needs to know exactly what you're doing with regards to the refurbishment works. So, one, they can inspect the areas where you're looking to disturb the building, and two, to make sure that they don't damage anything that's not within the scope of the refurbishment works. That's really key, because what we don't want to do is cause unnecessary additional costs for damaging an area which you're not planning to do anything with. We need all the information from the client or your client's representative so that we can make sure that happens. Now this is what we like to have. If we can get this on every survey, we're really happy. So if you've got existing plans, so we can see what the existing layout is made up of, and then any proposed plans, so how you're planning to reconfigure the building, and detailed scope of work. So exactly what you're doing. Are you removing the floor? Are you removing the walls? Are you replacing the ceilings? Are you reworking the electrics? All those points we need to know as much information on the front end so we can make sure that the survey is really in line with what you're doing.
Yeah, it's got to be fit for purpose. And I mean, when you're planning a refurbishment as well, a couple of things to think about. It's not just, I don't know, you could have an office and you're taking the middle wall out because you're having a big meeting room there, and you're going to install, I don't know, some aircon or a new interactive screen or something like that. However, it's not just those elements of work that you need to consider. It's also, well, how are you going to get power to this new aircon unit, the new interactive screen? There might be power that you can, that the Sparkies can tap into, but if not, then they're going to have to go back to the fuse board. What's the cable route like back there? Is it, I don't know, 4 rooms away? Is it next door? Because, like I say, as part of our survey, the refurb survey, we will need to check those cable routes to make sure there's no asbestos along those cable routes.
Yeah, the biggest frustration for us is we often get asked, I need a refurbishment survey of this building, and we say, okay, what are you doing? I don't know. I just need it all doing.
I'm just having a refurb, and
yeah, and we have to extract that information. So when we say, okay, so you're literally taking the whole building back to shell, is that right? And they're like,
no, I'm not doing that.
I'm just refurbing my little office. So as you can appreciate, the cost and what would actually happen is, you know, miles apart.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, if you take anything from this whole presentation today, is refurbishment surveys, you need to get the scopes, you need to get it early and get us in to do those surveys at the front end.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, the big thing with asbestos, it should be thought about first in part of the project. A lot of the time it comes along later and then crops up as an issue, a cost, a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was thought about first and planned in, it makes everybody's lives in the project a hell of a lot easier. So yeah.
Definitely. Reduces costs, makes it safer, everyone's happy.
Yeah. Timescales can be stuck to, budgets can be stuck to, all the rest of it. Whereas if it doesn't, like I say, it is a massive pain in the arse when asbestos is discovered on a project. Yeah. So what we see, again, like Neil said earlier, we're up in the intrusion, so we'll be up in our PPE and RPE. So there's a guy on screen, he's got Tyvek coveralls on, he's got a respirator on, and again, this is because we're opening up areas, we're opening up voids, so they're pretty grubby anyway, so we'd want to protect our clothes from dust and dirt, but also because we're going into areas we don't know what's behind there, we wear those kind of things to protect ourselves.
Yeah, it's more of a precaution.
Yes.
But because the way that we actually do the surveys, it is minimal disturbance to the actual fabric, so we do it safely. And this is just a kind of a last line of defence, really.
Yeah. So we've got some photos on screen. Again, there's the left one. There's a fixed grid tiled ceiling. The surveyor has taken a tile out because he needs to inspect in the void. The one in the middle is a plasterboard ceiling, so it could be a plasterboard ceiling, plasterboard wall. If they're being disturbed, if they're coming out, and there's not an inspection hole there, then we need to create an inspection hole. And then the last one is a layer of floor screed below 2 other layers of floor screed. And again, this kind of ties in with the scope. If we hadn't had the information saying that all of the screed in this retail unit was being taken right back to the base, then the asbestos bitumen on the very base wouldn't have been found. Just the top layer of screed would have been. But we were given the information that the scope was to take it right back to the base level, which allowed us to find the asbestos.
That's a retail scenario that's very common, isn't it? Retail units are refurbed over the years quite commonly, quite often, and it's far easier, rather than to take the existing screed up, they just go over the top, and that's what's happened in this scenario. And they've gone back to the original flooring level, and that had an asbestos tile glued down to it, and they've left the glue there in situ.
Yeah.
So what else do you need to consider then with asbestos refurbishment surveys? When can they safely be undertaken? Now, generally speaking, refurbishment surveys have to be done in unoccupied areas, so we can't have occupants within the areas that we're looking to intrusively inspect, simply because, as Ian said, we're opening up areas of the building that we don't know what's behind and we don't know what's in there, so we could be opening up an asbestos risk or just general dust and health and safety risk, really. Yeah. So they have to be done while the premises or the areas are unoccupied. So because of that, you may need to consider doing two-phase surveys, possibly. To give an example of that, if it's a school, schools are, they can't be shut down because of the pupil safety. So often with schools, we go in at half term, survey as much as we can. We can intrusively inspect and we may reinstate, but there still may be areas that we need to go back at a later date when in the school holidays, when it's completely unoccupied and the work's going to be programmed in, just to check those last areas.
Those remaining areas.
Yeah. And because of that, as I said, reinstatement may be needed, and definitely sometimes you may need to do air monitoring. So if we've disturbed the building, to give the reassurance back to the occupants that are coming back into the building, we may need to do air monitoring to prove that the asbestos fibres are not within the air or return to a safe level.
Yeah, and it's just something to consider. Schools, offices, they're kind of the main areas where we undertake this. And it's just to give that additional level of reassurance that nothing has been disturbed and it is safe to re-enter and reoccupy.
Yeah, definitely. Asbestos is an emotive word.
Yes.
And as soon as people, occupants, employees, hear the word asbestos, people do tend to get a little bit nervous. And if you've had air monitoring done, it gives you that evidence and reassurance to the occupants that it's then safe, the area is safe to reoccupy.
So, what is a demolition survey? It's used to identify all asbestos that may be hidden. So, where we intrusively inspect in a refurbishment survey, again, it gets ratcheted up at the next level of the intrusion. If you think about a building, all the elements within it that might need to be opened up to be inspected behind could be column casings, boxings, beam boxings, walls, wall voids, all those type of things. So that's the kind of level that we're now talking about going to on a demo survey.
Yeah, it's basically into every
area. Nook and cranny, every area.
Every void needs to be checked to see if there's anything hidden within it, basically.
Yeah. And it is used, obviously, before the complete demo of a building. It's totally intrusive and destructive. It's designed to access all areas of the building. We only use surveyor's tools. We generally don't use mechanical tools, so no big machines or anything. I mean, that'd be great because it'd make our lives easy, but we don't do that because of the risk of disturbing asbestos. And because of the nature of it and the kind of the opening up levels that we go to, it can't be occupied after. Whereas a refurb survey, you could patch up the wall after we've had an inspection. For a demo survey, like Neil said, we're literally opening up every part of the building. Yeah. So you can't occupy a building after a demo survey. No,
exactly. So to properly access all areas, we've got to take out windows, we've got to take out the windowsills, doors off, door frames off,
architraves off.
Yeah, floors up, so we can inspect into the cavities below the floors. It's literally, you name it,
everywhere
is opened up. Brick risers, He's going to go through some examples.
Yeah, so what will you see? I mean, so PPE, RPE wise, very similar to what we wear during a refurb. It's the same reasons, the same type of stuff. Got some examples on the screen. So on the left, we've got a brick riser that was clad at the front. Again, all the cladding has been taken off and removed, so we can inspect fully within that riser. The middle photo is of a window where the windowsill has been completely lifted and taken up, and that windowsill has revealed there's two white packers on that board. Now those white packers were asbestos insulating board, so when the window fitters or the chippies were putting that in, instead of using timber, they've had a bit of asbestos insulating board and they've used that as packers. So that's kind of shows you some random places that we find it. And like Neil said, around windows, when we take windows out, we find packers in those kind of places.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's like they probably would have had asbestos clad. I remember this site. You know, they would have had insulating board clad in their columns and beams, and these probably would have just been offcuts. So instead of binning them, they just like used them in the
in the
windows. Yeah.
And then the final photo on the right on this slide, there's it's a window with a brick cavity beneath the window. So like Neil said, we need to be opening up cavities like this. We need to be taking the windows out. Within that area, there was a asbestos bitumen damp-proof course that lined the walls on this survey. So again, it shows you the reasons why we go to those sorts of levels. And then the last couple of slides on this, there's a photo on the left. There's a radiator lying on the floor. There's an old chimney sort of entrance that it was hiding. And again, that just highlights the kind of levels of intrusion that we need to go to. All the services need to be off for a full demo survey. Water, gas, electric, all of these things need to be off because we need to remove radiators. If the water wasn't off in this, we couldn't have removed it. We wouldn't have found the chimney, and within that chimney was an asbestos cement lining flue in there, so that was hidden by the rad. And then there's just another photo. This was low-level seating that was breeze blocked up with a cavity in that. Again, we've opened that up to inspect within it.
Okay, so the asbestos survey process. So we go from zero knowledge, so no knowledge of asbestos within that building, all the way to full knowledge. And that commences with an asbestos management survey. So we'd have an asbestos management survey carried out, and that would usually identify most of the asbestos from a survey and surface level. Then over the years, what would happen in the building, that would probably get some refurbishment surveys. They may be specific to small jobs or maybe the whole premise, and that would then identify some of the hidden asbestos within the building. Then we'd follow on with a demolition survey. Right at the end of the life of the building, before it's pulled down, we have a demolition survey, and this would be fully intrusive, so it would identify all of the asbestos within the building. However, it's only until we have completely demolished the building do we get full history and knowledge of what asbestos is contained within that building. And the reason is because there will still be elements within that building that can't be accessed during any survey, and it's only at the point that it's being taken down by the machines that it's completely opened up and we can see and inspect and identify whether there is any asbestos there or not.
Yeah, so a couple of examples of that would be precast concrete type buildings, precast columns where you've got huge big columns that can't be broken into by a surveyor. It can only be dealt with by a machine. Also the floor slab. Time and again we've seen loads of sites where all the asbestos has been removed above slab, all the building has been demoed above slab. The last job to do on site is literally break up the floor slab. The machine starts breaking it up, starts pulling it out, and then lo and behold, whoever built the building backfilled that hole originally with a load of asbestos.
Yeah.
So,
and that is shockingly more common than you would actually think.
Yes, it really is. So yeah, like Neil said, it's only at that point when the building's gone, the floor slab's gone, everything's done, can you then look back and say, right, we now know what asbestos we did have. It's only at that point. So just kind of going over that point, the survey guide basically kind of backs up that it's now recognised, this is what the survey guide states, it's now recognised that even with complete access demolition surveys, all asbestos containing materials may not be identified and only becomes apparent during demolition itself. So I hope those examples that I gave you of the floor slab and the cast columns and things like that kind of identify how and why.
Okay, asbestos re-inspections then. So we just talked about the different surveys. Now asbestos re-inspections, although they're not technically surveys, they are kind of included within the survey realm, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the approved code of practice, which is the document that explains how to comply with the asbestos regulations, actually states that as a minimum, the management plan, including records and drawings, should be reviewed every 12 months. Okay, so the key thing from that is the management plan, including the records and drawings. So generally that refers to the asbestos register and the drawings associated with that. So therefore, a re-inspection, not a new survey of asbestos material, should be undertaken annually as an absolute minimum. This will depend on the risk associated with disturbance of the material. More regular checks may be required. What that means is if you've got a material which is in a greater risk of being disturbed, then you may need to increase the checks on that material. Asbestos re-inspection must be undertaken by a competent person. The HSE define a competent person as someone who has sufficient training and experience or knowledge and other qualities. Now, it's not actually saying that you need to get a professional like ourselves in to do that. However, you still need to tick the box in all of those. And if you look at the other qualities, that's not defined, definitely.
No. I mean, like it says, training, experience, knowledge, and other qualities.
Yeah, what sort of training do you need for that, and how do you define the experience? We have cases where we have trained our clients to actually fulfil this, but I would never recommend just going off and doing it yourselves without no knowledge.
No, I mean, a lot of the time clients do just ask us to do the re-inspections because once we've done the re-inspection, we'll update all the data, all the report, literally everything, and hand them over a brand new one, rather than clients updating it themselves and, I don't know, just crossing stuff out and updating it with pen on site, whatever. So how do you get the right asbestos surveyor? It's a very good question. So the Health and Safety Executive, they strongly recommend the use of UCAS accredited surveying companies. Now UCAS is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. They essentially set a level and a benchmark for asbestos surveying companies to adhere to. And like it says here, HSE strongly recommend it. For me, if the HSE is strongly recommending something, I'm going to comply, and I think I'd take their advice. If a company is not UCAS accredited, then the person employing the company is responsible to check that they're competent to complete their work. So if you don't use a UCAS surveyor, then it's down to you to ensure that they are competent. How can you check competence? Now, the thing is with this, I would do this for non-accredited companies. I'd even use it for UCAS accredited companies. Is it their training, qualification, experience? Is it that they hold knowledge about the building? Can they prove independence and impartiality? Have they got a quality management system? Can they confirm they adhere to HSG 264? We still see surveys now that refer back to Type 1, Type 2, Type 3. That guidance was changed in 2010. These are the kind of things that you need to check. Did they do any continual professional development? Did they pass a course, I don't know, back in the year 2000, and they've done zip zero since, and they're just out there doing surveys?
Yeah, just the only thing I would just add to this is, okay, if a company is UCAS accredited, they're most likely to have within the company the experience, the knowledge, the know-how, how to do your asbestos survey. But are they going to send that person? And all too often, the company's great, but sometimes the individual surveyor is not the best. So if you are employing a company, it's ask them, well, okay, what surveyor am I going to get, and what's their experience, and how good are they, really?
Who? Can I see their CV? Are they sending Neil Munro? Right,
yeah.
Sending Neil Munro, I want a copy of his CV, please.
Yeah, what experience has he done? What jobs has he done? Has he surveyed my sites before?
Yeah.
It's those sort of questions.
So what we've put together was a free download form that you can use for checking these things from your surveying companies.
So if you go to www.acorn-as.com/asbestos-surveyor-competent-check. Nice and short for you.
It's basically it's our website, asbestos surveyor competency check with hyphens in the middle, and then you can basically download this, and I would use this, send it to any companies that you're asking to do asbestos surveys for. If they're struggling answering these questions, it does raise doubts and concerns on whether they're good enough to be completing your work.
Yeah, we would expect if the client sent us a form like that, that's just a formality that we would just fill in and send it back to them. There's nothing tricky if you've got all the stuff in place.
Yeah. So all UCAS organisations, like I said, they meet those criteria. Just a photo on screen. We've got the UCAS inspection logo and the UCAS testing logo. What you're looking for, a Type C inspection body accreditation to ISO 17020, and for the testing laboratory, it's ISO 17025. And Acorn Analytical Services, we meet all of those criteria, and we're accredited for all those elements. So, how do you get the right asbestos contractor?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so it is very similar to, obviously, selecting an asbestos surveyor. You're asking the similar questions, but regards to asbestos removal contractors, we would always recommend using a HC licensed asbestos contractor, simply because to be granted the license, they have to have everything in place. They have to have the correct insurance, they have to have the correct training, they have to have the correct face fits for their masks and their operatives, they have to have the correct method statements, plan of works, the correct and maintained equipment. All those things in place is really important. Now, that's not to say that non-licensed contractors may have those in place, but there's no sort of external verification of that.
Yeah.
Other stuff to look for: have they got any ISO accreditation? So are they working to a quality manual? Are they working to sort of a health and safety accreditation? Because that's really important. Probably one of the most important things is, are they correctly insured to the level that meets your job or what you're proposing to do? Because when asbestos removal works goes wrong, it can be very, very costly. So making sure that they're correctly insured is a big one for us. Are they joined to any trade associations? Now, I think both of the trade associations, I know definitely one, they as membership you have to be audited by them.
Yeah, both of them.
Ian will obviously know more because he was on that side for a little while. Do you want to give a little bit about the actual audits themselves?
Yeah, so both trade associations, the contractors have to meet a minimum criteria audit. So they put forward a job that they want to be audited on as part of their membership. They have to provide obviously copies of all their insurances and everything else. An independent auditor will then go out and audit that company and make sure that everything is all above board as per their method statement and their risk assessments.
Yeah, so obviously having a member that you have got a kind of an external verification on the quality of
it's
that
just another
contractor.
level of confidence.
Yeah, it's just something else. If they haven't got anything, maybe ask them the question why they haven't joined that.
Yes.
That's another thing. Health and safety accreditations, again, can they meet those criteria? Financial stability, okay, so as I said earlier, the asbestos removal works can be very expensive, and the contractors tend to have to front load all those expenses before they get paid, so that can cause massive cash flow sort of problems for the contractor. So definitely check their financial stability. CRB checks or DBS checks, that's quite an important one for checking the contractors that are working on your sites, and have they got their correct plan of works and risk assessments to do their works. And again, final one, which is again a really important one, is have they got any references that they can provide?
Yeah, and with any reference, I would also look to speak to them. It's all very well filling in a form, but I would also ask to pick up the phone to whoever they're supplying as a referee, just to kind of have a chat with them, because a lot of the times more information can be gleaned by having a chat. And just going back to the DBS CRB checks, if we ever meet, and I've got a very funny story about CRBs and DBS on a particular site. So if we do ever meet, collar me, ask me to tell you the story. You'll find it quite amusing. So again, gone one too far. So we've created a form for the contractors. It's a download form. It's similar to exactly the same as the other one. You can use your logo. You can download it from our web address, acorn-as.com, and it's asbestos contractor competency check, all with hyphens in the middle. So asbestos contractor competence check. Like Neil said earlier, lovely, short and simple for you, not. So, or the thing is, the alternative is Acorn can remove that asbestos headache for you. We offer full project management of asbestos projects. We utilise vetted contractors that are on our approved list, which is always being updated because we work with contractors. We're always independently auditing them, making sure they're doing everything they should on our sites. We know who's pricing well in the industry. We know who's best to handle what type of project. We know any issues that contractors have going on. It's a small industry. We often hear about financial issues that are going on, or perhaps issues that have been discovered on a site. The guys all talk to one another. So yeah, we do kind of get the inside track on those kind of things as well.
Okay, asbestos survey reports then. Okay, so HSG 264 Asbestos Survey Guide. So it's current asbestos guidance. When this was brought in 2010, prior to that there was no real guidance on how asbestos survey reports should be produced. So the guidance put together what should be included within an asbestos survey report. So to bullet point them, it should have an executive summary. So an executive summary should give you a snapshot of what's been identified from an asbestos point of view. That should be produced in a material risk order. It should also give you an indication on what areas weren't accessed and provide the scope of the survey within that quick summary. So introduction and scope of works. So it should detail what the scope was it an asbestos management survey, and what was the scope within the building? Was it the whole site, or was it just a partial part of the site? General site information and survey information, so again detailing how the survey was conducted and a general overview of the site. Survey results and material risk assessments, so what was identified during the survey, and most importantly material risk assessments, and I'll explain those in the later slides. Conclusions and action, so what does the client have to do with the asbestos? Any recommendations if asbestos has been identified. Bulk analysis results, which have to be done by a UCAS accredited lab. Okay, that's a legal requirement to analyse asbestos samples. So there should be a certificate within that report confirming the results of any samples collected. And plans. This was another key change in this guidance. There should be a plan of all areas that have been inspected included within the asbestos survey report. Okay.
So, going to run through a copy of one of our survey reports just to kind of give you a flavour. So we've got on screen a photo. It says asbestos management survey, big writing at the top. You can easily see what survey we've carried out. Beneath that there's a picture of the building, the site. Again, so instantly you can see where we've been, what building it is. Tells you who we've done it for, on behalf of whom. Then the next page we've got a view of our executive summary, our scope and building details, and the asbestos containing materials. Now the scope and building details, as we alluded to earlier, that the scope element of asbestos surveys really should be checked, and this is your point to check, that the asbestos surveyor has understood exactly what you want to happen with that property. So when you get the report, you need to be making sure that what they've carried out and what they're saying they've carried out is in line with what you wanted. And then below that we've got the asbestos containing materials, and like Neil just said, they're listed from risk order, high risk down to the low risk.
Yeah, I would say just to add to the scope, it's really particularly important on refurbishment surveys to check. This is where you check that the scope that the surveyor has inspected against what you asked them to do. So yeah, just refurbishment surveys is really key to get that scope right. So always read those.
And then equally as important, no access areas. We find that some clients, all they do is flick straight to where the asbestos is, because that's where they foresee the problem. However, this is equally as important. If we've not accessed an area, then it's presumed to still contain asbestos. In law, we're all innocent until proven guilty. With asbestos, it's the reverse. It's everything's guilty until proven innocent, and that's why there's no access areas, and they're really important, because if the surveyor's not been into that area, you can't determine whether there's asbestos there or not. So if that is one of the areas that is going to be affected by your works, then you'll need to give them access and make sure that those areas are checked before you crack on with the works.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So, as Ian quite rightly said, you have to presume asbestos is present until you've got evidence it's not. If there's a no access area, then you haven't got the evidence to prove that it's not there. Now, with no access areas, you tend to find that sometimes asbestos surveyors will just add no access areas into their survey reports. If they're following the guidance, then they should be agreed with you, the client, before it goes into the report. So that's a really key thing to remember, and that's a key thing to ask as an asbestos surveyor before you employ them as well. It's having that procedure in place. Is we need to agree no access, what you're not going to inspect during this survey.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of photos of data sheets. On the left, we've got a picture of a toilet system with the data on that. On the right, we've got some asbestos debris. It looks like an old gutter or something like that on the floor.
The data sheet should describe, now different companies produce these in different format, but it should describe where the material is, so record the building, the floor and the room area, so it tells you where in the building the asbestos material has been identified. Have a description of what it is, so we've got a toilet system in these examples and we've got some asbestos cement. It should tell you the sample reference number, so where the surveyor has actually collected that sample, they will number it, and then that will correspond to the actual certificate, the bulk analysis certificate, that should be provided with the report as well. It should give a quantity, so how much of the material is present, and it should just give an indication on how easily it is to access that material, so if it's easy to get to or if it's in a difficult location. And then we move on to the material risk assessment. Now, a material risk assessment will provide you with the information on how easily or how readily that material will release asbestos fibre should it be disturbed. Now, the material risk assessment is put together by an algorithm that is detailed within the asbestos survey guidance, and it looks at product type, so what the secondary material the asbestos is in, the condition of it, so if it's in a good condition or if it's in a highly damaged condition, and it'll also look at the surface treatment, so is it sealed or unsealed, and it will also look at what material asbestos fibre is within the material. Put those all together in an algorithm and it will give you a result of either very low risk of releasing asbestos fibre all the way through to high risk of releasing asbestos fibre. Now that then can be used to be put together with additional assessments to see what's the risk of somebody being exposed to that. Also in the data sheets, we'd like to see some comments from the surveyor. So the comments might be relating to how the asbestos was fixed, or if there was anything in the area relating to it, any additional information that the surveyor can provide to help the management of that material. And probably the most important bit is the recommendation. So what can the client, or what should the client do with the asbestos material, whether that be manage, maybe it may need to be repaired or encapsulated, or if in the worst case it may be a recommendation for removal.
Then we've got next slide, it's an asbestos register. So it basically details out all the asbestos that's on site, puts it in tabular format of the information that we just spoke about on the data sheets, and then it's got the action at the end of it, of whether it's manage, remove, encapsulate, whatever. Yeah,
from the ongoing management of asbestos, the asbestos register is really the key element that needs to be kept up to date. So as stuff within the building or changes within the building happens, it's keeping this information up to date. If anything's repaired, upgrading that assessment, or if anything's removed, is removing it from the register. So this is the live document that should be kept along with the drawings.
We've now got a screenshot of the asbestos bulk sample analysis certificate, on here you can see we've got our UCAS logo at the top. That's the logo that we mentioned earlier. That's the minimum requirement. You need that to analyse the asbestos samples. It details out the product type, where it was taken, and then the analysis result. It's just the scientific element of our reports. And then finally we've got a beautiful plan. And basically the plan has got two colours on it. Red contains asbestos, blue is not access / presumed asbestos. And again, this was kind of a big change between within the survey guide. Before the survey guide was out, you get a report through and they look like rainbows, the plans at the end, because some companies might have, I don't know, green for insulating board, pink for floor tiles, blue for bitumen, whatever. The list went on, so it wasn't easily usable and easily seeable about what asbestos is. But now we've got red for asbestos, blue for presumed asbestos. Again, nice and simple. Got a photo here of interesting plan from a report that a client had given us. It basically looks like my 6-year-old son has drawn it.
Just a couple of square boxes and a few dots on it.
Yeah, a few dots with some dodgy written numbers. So that's what you don't want. Believe it or not, this was from a survey report that a client gave to us early part of 2018. And because they'd looked at this, they had it put doubt in their mind whether they'd had the survey done, carried out properly, asked us to resurvey it, and I'm glad they did, because we found a lot more asbestos than what the other company did.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. Now, there's lots of different regulations, and we're only going to scratch the surface on a few and just give you a few key points on what we feel that you need to know. So, Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012 came into force April of that year and replaced the previous set of regulations, which was 2006. In the scheme of regulations, that was really fast, but the reason for that change was an EU directive, so we had to comply with an EU directive, and there was a slight amendment to those regulations, and that covered non-licensed asbestos removal works. It added in an additional criteria within that some non-licensed works had to be notifiable. And for those works, any operatives had to have medical surveillance, and they had to keep health records associated with those works. So the points that we're going to cover, so we're going to cover training, which is covered by Regulation 10, information, instruction and training. I'm going to give you a quick just overview of the key prohibitions. We're going to go through the duty to manage, Regulation 4, and we're going to give you the sort of golden one, in the identification of the presence of asbestos, and Regulation 5.
So Reg 10, info, instruction and training. There's 3 types of asbestos training. Asbestos awareness, asbestos training for non-licensable works, and asbestos training for licensable works. They're each specific to the task. So if you've got awareness training, you can't go and start doing asbestos removal. If you've only got non-licensed asbestos training, you can't go and start playing with licensed asbestos. So that's what I mean by they're each specific to their task. The regs state that awareness training is required to be given to employees who could foreseeably expose them to asbestos. This is for those persons who are liable to disturb asbestos whilst carrying out their works, or who may influence. So those are the 2 points. The person who's carrying out the works, but also those who may influence. So we've got a list here on the screen. There's all the usual site workers, sparkies, plumbers, gas fitters, joiners, every kind of construction worker that you can think of. But then at the bottom here we've got architects, building surveyors, other such professionals. Could be property managers, facilities managers, anyone kind of, like I said, that's influencing those works should have asbestos awareness training.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so for instance, the plasterer's supervisor or manager, if they're not actually doing the physical works, then they're influencing how their employees are carrying out the works. They have to have that training as well.
There is a slight exemption if an employer can demonstrate that They only ever work on a building that's free of asbestos. So any building that's built post 2000, can you then not have asbestos awareness training? But I mean, there will be sites out there where their guys only ever work on new buildings, but I think that's quite rare. So I think most people will be required to have awareness training. So how often should it be updated? Well, long and short of it is, once you've had the training undertaken, it should be refreshed every 12 months, and it should be undertaken with a training needs analysis. So identify the areas that you need to brush up on, or the guys or ladies that are out there working need to brush up on.
So, prohibition then. So the real key date to remember. So when was asbestos completely banned in this country? So it was November 1999. So what we say is, if you've got a premise that was built after 2000, it shouldn't contain asbestos. So the ban covered any product to which asbestos fibre was intentionally added. The ban applies to all new use of asbestos. Existing asbestos can be managed accordingly. Regulation 4 then. Okay, so this is probably the biggest regulation, and it's probably the most uncomplied with. This regulation's been in place since 2002. Okay, and today we still get inquiries from clients asking for an asbestos survey because they've never heard and they didn't know they needed to have one. So, what do you need to do with Reg 4? Okay, so step 1. You need to take reasonable steps to find out if there are any products containing asbestos in a non-domestic premise, and if so, its amount, where it is and what condition it is in. Okay, so how do we do that? So key point, non-domestic premise. Now, Regulation 4 only applies to non-domestic premises, and step 1 you would have an asbestos survey. Okay, so that would identify whether you've got asbestos. It will provide you with the information on the condition of it, and it will also give you some recommendations. Step 2 is you need to presume asbestos is present unless you've got strong evidence that it's not. As we sort of referred to earlier, it's guilty till proven innocent. So if you've got an area within that building or as part of that survey that hasn't been accessed, you have to presume asbestos is there until you've got evidence it's not. So particularly if you were looking to manage asbestos, you would only have a management survey. Therefore, any areas outside of that management survey, you have to presume asbestos is present. I think that's a key thing to remember there. Number 3, make and keep up to date a record of the location and condition of asbestos-containing products or products which are presumed to contain asbestos. So this is where people start to fall down. So the key point of this is keeping it up to date. So if you're having works carried out in your building, you've had asbestos removed or you've had it repaired, the conditions change, you have to keep that up to date. So that's the ongoing management of those materials that you have to do. So next then, so this is where we see lots of clients dropping off on their compliance. So number 4 is you need to assess the risk of anyone being exposed to fibres from the products identified. So in the asbestos survey report, generally speaking, they're provided material risks. So the material risk is how easily that material will release asbestos fibre should it be disturbed. But what Regulation 4 actually asks for in addition to this is you have to make your own assessment on what's the risk of somebody coming into contact with that asbestos and being exposed to asbestos fibre. Now, in addition to the material risk assessments, we can undertake what's called priority risk assessments, which do look at that occupant exposure, and it will look at the type of activities within the area, it will look at how many people are in the area, how long they stay there, and they take this algorithm again and put that together with the material risk assessment will give you a total risk, and it will also provide you with information and help you prioritise what you need to do with those materials. So whether it is, okay, the material risk and the occupant or the priority risk is very high, I really urgently need to do something with that, whether that be removal, repair or isolate the area. So those assessments will really help you put together how you're going to manage those asbestos materials. Once those are done and you've got those assessments carried out, you can then decide what you need to do and put together an asbestos management plan. So you need to detail how you're going to manage the asbestos risk within your property. Now, it can be as simple or as complicated as you need to make it regarding your site. For instance, if you've got a big operation with multiple managers and sites and operatives, works are going on all over the place, that's going to be a complicated management plan. However, if you're a simple one-man retail unit, your management plan is going to be very simple because you're going to be in control of it. So once you've decided how you're going to manage your asbestos, so how you're going to control contractors, how you're going to provide the information of asbestos to people within the building, whatever you decide to manage that process, you need to make sure in step 6 that you actually go and do it. There's no point having the best management plan in the world with every box ticked if you don't actually follow it. So make sure you do it. Number 7 is periodically review and monitor the plan and the arrangements that act on it to make sure the plan remains up to date. So buildings change all the time, procedures, people change all the time in buildings, so you may need to update the management plan to make sure it's relevant to the building and the asbestos contained within it, and to make sure it is actually working and whatever steps you put in place to manage it are being followed. Number 8, probably the most important one, is you have to provide the asbestos information within your building to anyone that needs it, and particularly that is anyone coming into the building to carry out those works.
So that's Reg 4. Like Neil said, that's kind of the one of the main ones, and that covers non-domestic premises for the management. So the duty holder, it's on the duty holder or whoever got repair and maintenance responsibility for the property. That's who Reg 4 sits. Reg 5 sits on the employer's shoulders, if you like, of their responsibility. So they're coming at it from 2 different angles, but both for the same reason of trying to stop people being exposed to asbestos. So Reg 5, the identification and presence of asbestos. Prior to any intrusive works, an appropriate assessment should have been conducted to confirm if asbestos is present. So essentially, it's an asbestos survey. A check needs to have happened before anybody goes and does any works. Employers have the duty to identify before work starts, so employers, okay? No demo maintenance work is to be carried out which is liable to expose employees to asbestos unless there's an assessment that identifies asbestos. So again, it's reiterating, you need to have a check done. If the information from the client isn't available, nor in a reliable format, then the employer should establish if asbestos is present or assume it is. So what this is covering off the whole domestic market, if you like. If Mrs. Smith, who lives at number 1 the High Street, is having, I don't know, a refurb of her house, the builders that are going into that property to do that works, they would ask her and say, Mrs. Smith, have you got a copy of your asbestos survey report? We all know that Mrs. Smith is not going to have one because she's a domestic homeowner. She's not even thought about asbestos or anything. But at that point, it's not like, well, Mrs. Smith hasn't got one, so we can just crack on. It falls back to the responsibility of the employer to then make an assessment themselves. They then need to instruct for a survey to identify if there's asbestos there or not. So like I say, Reg 4 is coming at it from the duty holder in the non-domestic side, that the people on site should be managing their asbestos. This is coming at it from the employers have a duty of care and responsibility to make sure there's no asbestos that their guys are going to go and get disturbed and be exposed to.
Yeah, so basically in a non-domestic situation, both are equally responsible for providing that information. So there's no, well, if you're not doing it, I'm not doing it. They're both equally. So if something was to go wrong, they'd both be equally in trouble.
And that's us finished on this one today. If like Neil said earlier, if you've got any questions whatsoever, join the Asbestos Knowledge Empire on Facebook.
Yeah. We'd love to see you on there.
Yeah.
We'd love to answer your questions. Please comment. If you need us, any of the links, if you request it in the Facebook group, we'll post them in there. If you need a copy of the book, we'll post that in there. So yeah, anything you want to ask, please come and join us there.
Yeah, get in touch. I mean, if there's any kind of takeaway points today, it's essentially remember asbestos first and not last. Have your asbestos survey carried out. Actually do something with it. Put the things in place and the control measures, because that's all we're trying to do. We want to stop people being exposed to asbestos.
That's us for now.
Thanks a lot.
See you in the next one.